Hello and welcome to Post Point, a topical podcast from the Puyallup Post. Today we're talking about banned books. I'm Damien and I'm joined with
Dawn
and Eleise.
Let's just get right into it.
Let's get right into it. So do you guys have any knowledge of the history of how long ago banning books kind of started?
I mean, if you go really far back, you can find evidence of the Chinese burning books in like 600 BC to remove knowledge that would overthrow the government. And that's kind of been a historical pattern all throughout history with like book burnings and stuff.
Right. And I think even dating back to Socrates, they, definitely thought what he was trying to teach youth was heretical, I guess would be the term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know very little about the history of banned books.
So I know that one of the major things we're looking at today is why books are banned in public institutions such as libraries, and most often it's public education libraries. I did a little bit of research, and it looks like kind of starting in about the 80s is when a lot of this really kicked off. It was a lawsuit of the Board of Education of Island Trees School District versus PICO. And the quote that I gleaned said something about school officials cannot remove library material just because they disagree with the ideas behind it. So I'm not sure what's happened since then because we keep seeing lists of banned books, right?
I feel like I still nowadays see stories about books coming out today that would be banned in schools.
Oh, absolutely. Especially when we look at some of the languaging behind why certain books have been banned. It's always having something to do with vulgarity, sexuality, anything that challenges, I think, whatever the current social norm is at the time. But also how you were saying earlier, Damien, it's like a challenge to government, right? Mm-hmm. Anytime you give people more information, they're more likely to want even more information. And if we educate people, we might want to not pay attention to the rules anymore.
Do you think there are any books on the list that deserve to be banned to not be in schools?
Eleise and I were chatting about that earlier. Do you want to talk about that?
I think it's a very tricky topic. It's one of those things where it's not always black and white. There are many people that may have religious beliefs behind why they don't want their children exposed to some of this material, and I think that they have every right to make that decision for their family. Unfortunately, by challenging some of these books, they're preventing other families and other children from learning and taking advantage of some of these stories that the authors wanted to share. And it's not easy because there's some that make they may make very valid points against some of these books, and by banning them, we're preventing other families from reading them.
Yeah, and I wonder if actually, in answer to your question, I personally don't think any book should be banned. I sort of have a large, probably overarching and too easy, opinion that censorship of any form is not a good thing. But I will say, our editor-in-chief would like us to talk about Lolita. That's actually one of my favorite novels, but I will say I can understand as a parent potentially not wanting my child to be reading about what is, in essence at least, right, pedophilia, incest, things like that. I think where the problem lies, though, is that if I were to make that decision that because I'm not comfortable with my child, say, reading it, then I'm taking that decision out of other people's hands. Like, I'm making a decision for their children as well if I go and challenge this book and get it pulled off the shelves. And who is to say that that lesson or that introduction to these themes isn't exactly what that child needed, right? So that's a hard one. I mean, I think that in general I'm always going to land on the side of no censorship. And I think, kind of like Eleise was alluding to earlier, it's important to hear everyone's side and why maybe they're challenging something.
I just want to make it clear that I'm very strongly anti-censorship myself. But one thing that's always helpful when talking about these kinds of things is to look at the most extreme case of something.
Sure.
And it's not on a lot of common academic banned books lists, but this is a book that is universally banned. It's called The Anarchist Cookbook, and it was written in the 1970s by a hippie that was really disgruntled after a bunch of protesting, and he thought the government was out of control. So he wrote a whole book and compiled a bunch of old military documents from around the world of how to overthrow a government violently. It's like a guide. It has instructions on bombs, weapons, napalm, like everything you could make to hurt a lot of people. And he's since like come out and said, I'm remorseful that I wrote this book. I wrote it at a very different time in my life. And this book has actually been cited in a lot of like really crazy cases. It's been cited in Columbine and a lot of other shooting cases, which is totally not close to the point of the original book itself. It's representative of a time where the world was in the Cold War, and people thought the government was actually taking everything over. That kind of book being in the public hands, and you can get it on Amazon. I wouldn't order it on Amazon because I don't want to be on a government watch list, but you can get it on Amazon nowadays.
Too much information.
Yeah, and I could totally see that being a justifiable thing to ban, from letting young people who might be emotionally disturbed get their hands on.
Right, right. And so I think that's right in line with kind of where we're all landing, is that just like anything else, you can't have these black and white rules that are going to fit every situation. I feel, though, like where the danger lies is that slippery slope of if we open the door to any kind of book banning, where does it stop, right? Because what someone can say is offensive to them might just be, like you had said, Eleise, a religious preference, or something that could be dismissed by someone else. And so where does that line of argument stop then? Because like that's a totally valid reason. We don't want bomb making capabilities in the hands of people who actually want to make a bomb and hurt people, right?
Right.
And right, we talk about like the First Amendment. You shall not abridge freedom of speech. How do we do that?
Right.
I like that we all go silent.
Because I think I agree with you guys that it's definitely a very slippery slope, and I think that people should have the opportunity to make these decisions themselves and be able to make the decision whether they want to have access to this information or not. And especially nowadays, we're seeing a lot of books on the banned list, and there are a lot of teachers and librarians that talk about their experiences with the banned book list and how it can be awkward for them, trying to handle maybe some of these materials that maybe they want to teach but they can't, or they're meeting pushback from parents that they don't approve of some of the material that they're teaching. And unfortunately, that raises the question, where does that line stop? When can a parent protect their child from certain material, and when does it start preventing other children from learning?
Right.
So that leads me to a question.
Yes.
Out of the books you've been looking at on the list, what is perhaps the least justified to be on that list, in your opinion?
Oh my gosh, I almost don't know where to start. I mean, we were just looking at this list, and all of us were sort of marveling at the fact that all the books we consider classics that get taught now, at junior high levels, and they're just readily acceptable, probably still getting challenged. But like all of them are so vital and important for us understanding the past and how things were, that to me they're all insane to be on that list. Like my favorite novel of all time is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and that has consistently been banned, along with Great Gatsby and a lot of Steinbeck and things like that, again for these ideas that it's going against the grain of society at the time. But it's just crazy to think that because someone's telling a story in a legitimate way that people may be uncomfortable with hearing, people can claim, like some of the quotes about To Kill a Mockingbird, filthy, trashy novel, did psychological damage to the integration system, the successful integration system, where it's like now we look back and go, there was no successful integration system, that's not even true. But at the time, people were very, not wanting other people to look at that as a positive thing, right? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I just feel like everything on the banned book list is ridiculous to be there. I think maybe Harry Potter, though, for modern.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially since, growing up in the 90s, I remember, hearing parents talk about the Harry Potter series and how it's filled with witchcraft, and there was always there was the talk of Satanism, and as a child, I know for me, I didn't see it as that. This is Harry Potter, the boy who lived, and I know for me, I have a lot of fondness for that series, and to imagine that children in the schools may not have that opportunity that I had. It's kind of sad that we're getting to the point where anything that is deemed inappropriate is going to be challenged, and a lot of it is, complaints of sexual content or violence or LGBTQ content, and a lot of it you can't help but wonder, especially in 2018, are some of these bannings required?
Right.
Is it necessary to take it to this level?
Adding on to that, in 2018, would banning it really have an effect if anyone really wanted to seek these things out anyway?
Right.
It's just I feel like everything I want is available online nowadays. You can
Right.
always find a free rip of something somewhere.
Right.
Absolutely. And if you can't find it online, then you've got bookstores or thrift stores, or you have friends, so by banning it, you're not really preventing this person from getting that content.
No. And I feel like that's probably true, except in the most extreme cases where governments are seizing books and burning them. But, we've always had a way to get what we want. And what's interesting to me is that anytime you try to ban a book, all you're going to do is raise the intrigue of that book. You're going to make people more interested and want to read it more. So if you're really trying to suppress information or ideas, it just seems like such a fallacy to try to do it in that way. But going back to the Harry Potter, where a lot of parents were saying it's Satanism, do you think those parents actually read the book, or are they just spouting opinions based on what they think it is?
I doubt those parents even read the Bible.
Well, to be fair, I've never read the Bible. That's a daunting task.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of people who point the religious finger often haven't read the Bible.
Right,
Yeah.
got it.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, yeah.
Yeah, and because I know in online, one of the complaints against one of the banned books, Beloved by Toni Morrison, one of the parents that challenged it admitted he hadn't read the book. And it brings up that question, these parents that are challenging some of these stories, have they actually read the book, or are they going off of assumptions about the story?
And I feel like it actually brings up a bigger point, which is that if you're going to raise a child in the public sphere, right, and send them to a public institution, if you want that much control over your kids, then you can shell out the money for a private education in which you have more say in the books, both textbook and just library books that are available. But I feel like if you're in the public sphere, you're saying, go forth and be in the public sphere, and that you don't get to control then what is available in that public sphere for everyone. I think to me that's one of the fundamental issues, is just if you want to take advantage of the free library and the free public education system, you get to kind of take what it comes with. And I feel like educators and librarians, as well as obviously just the community itself, are the ones who get to have access to and speak on the subject matter that they want to read about.
I agree, and it definitely makes you wonder, with children in the public school system, how much control should a parent have, or how much influence should a parent have on the curriculum,
Right.
considering the fact that there are other children in that class. So, there's that, you have to respect a parent that may have concerns about some of the content, but at the same time, how much control should they have on whether or not something should be banned?
Yeah. And do either of you know what the ratio is, if it's mostly parents that are bringing these challenges that could potentially turn into book bans, or is it school boards or public boards or anything like that?
I would assume it's overwhelmingly just coalitions of parents
Right.
and maybe some teachers who have an opinion that differs from the norm.
From my understanding, and there's an overwhelming amount of parents
Just
that are
parents.
presenting challenges to some of these materials.
Yeah, it's so fascinating to me because I just feel like, so okay, your kid picks up a book and brings it home and has questions. Like, isn't that kind of the point? You're supposed to answer questions and teach them new things and guide them through life, and it's such an anathema to me to think that I would want to stifle my kids' learning. Like, yes, it might be uncomfortable and we might not want to look each other in the eyes or having this conversation, but who am I to say that, I don't know, a school shouldn't be teaching something to my kid? That whole thing is crazy to me.
And at the same time, wouldn't that give you more control over having that discussion with your child?
Exactly.
You've
Like, you've been given an opportunity.
Exactly. You can make sure that they have the right information, or maybe healthier information than what's available out there,
Right.
rather than stifling them and preventing them from getting this information.
Right.
Putting them in a situation where they have to get information from questionable sources.
Yeah. Oh,
And-
totally. I would much rather my kid come to me and ask me questions instead of his 13-year-old friends, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'd much rather have that conversation with him myself.
And especially when you start getting into some of the higher grades, like junior high and high school.
Mhm.
At one point, do these bands even make sense?
Right.
In high school, kids are being exposed to a lot more content than they would have, say, 20 or 30 years ago.
Oh,
And I think
yeah.
that's something to take into consideration, especially given some of the material in the books.
Mhm.
And I think by treating, say, high schoolers with respect and saying, we're going to tackle this serious topic, it offers a lot of growth
Mhm.
and development.
Yep, absolutely. I don't think we asked you, Damien. Do you have a book that's on the list that you were surprised to see it there?
No, Harry Potter is definitely one of those things that
Yeah.
comes up because I read. I'm not a huge book guy. Uh-oh. But I did read the Harry Potter series as I was growing up, as a lot of children did. And also I was from England, and it was huge over there, too.
Sure.
So that's definitely, it's a fun kids thing. It's like if you
Yeah.
ban Star Wars, kind of.
Mhm.
It's got like violence and stuff in there a little bit, and sure, they're saying things that are false, but it's just people pointing fingers at things they don't want to understand, and they see their kids emulating it, and it freaks them out a little bit.
Absolutely. And I wonder if, like, with Harry Potter, I wonder if parents are getting freaked out, not even so much because of the so-called Satanism, which I don't understand that argument, but it really is all about empowerment, right? That whole series is about him finding his strength, and, these kids are constantly bucking the rules and not doing what Dumbledore tells them, or at least hints at. So I just wonder if that was more of it, like, these books are encouraging our children to not listen to us parents. And again, can't have that, sort of like the anarchist cookbook. Can't have instruction manuals for overthrowing the government, in this case, parents.
There was one thing on the list I did see, though, and it was somebody who was challenging, it's people who challenge very political books. Specifically, Animal Farm was also a thing that
right.
surprised me,
George
and
Orwell.
1984 was on here, too.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think you have to look very hard to see that there's a definite political motivation behind why groups might want those books banned.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, some make more sense than others, even though I inherently, obviously, and I think we all do, just disagree with, getting rid of the source as the solution to what you don't agree with. That's crazy. Yeah, I'm just looking at some of these comments. Oh, so like right now, kind of the current ruling is that in public education, something has to be labeled as pervasively vulgar in order to constitute banning. But of course, as with so many of our legislation, it's incredibly nebulous, right? Because what's incredibly vulgar to me, or pervasively vulgar to me, is not going to be the same to someone else. So I feel like having that kind of an ambiguity in the wording is just opening the door for all of these ridiculous challenges, instead of just having a hard and fast, like, definition of what can or can't be accepted. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
I agree. I think that with such an ambiguous definition, it unfortunately leads to a very messy discussion, especially since, you know, there are a lot of books on the list that, you know, for many of us, we don't understand. You know, we're left asking, why is this book even on the list?
Right.
And then there are others where they may see that same title and think, you know, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And there's definitely a big divide on what is or what should and shouldn't be banned. And
Right.
unfortunately, that makes it very difficult to decide, okay, what should be banned and what shouldn't be. And
Yeah.
again, I don't agree with banning books, but if this is something that is to still remain in the system, I think we need to start deciding, okay, we need to come up with some stricter rules on what does or doesn't apply.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just don't know what that line is, because I know, like, Elise, you have a piece in this current issue of the Post where you talk about the fact that someone got in trouble at a public library for looking at pornography, and like a 13-year-old-ish person oversaw that. So that does kind of beg that question of, like, can I honestly say that I'm against banning books because I don't like censorship, but then also be in agreement with the fact that, yeah, a guy probably shouldn't be just openly watching porn in a public setting where there's kids around. You know what I mean? So, like, where does that, how do those two line up?
Or where's the line? And I think in situations like this, there is no black or white, yes or no answer. And what I may think is quote unquote right, that will drastically change from another person. I think a lot of it is choice, though. I think with books, there may be more of a choice, but then again, to play devil's advocate, people may argue that that may not always be the case. You know,
Right.
They may not be able to. Parents may not know what books their children are reading behind the, you know, when they're not watching them.
Sure.
And
But isn't that the case with everything in life?
Yes.
You know, we can't control everything, and I just feel like that's sort of the problem here, is that parents are trying to control a little too much. Where do you land, Damien? How do we fix this?
You definitely, I mean, you can. The internet exists now, so you can look at literally anything you want to. And everyone's kids do.
Right.
The best thing I think that anyone could do as a parent towards their kid is talk to them. And if something comes up from them, you explain it to them in a way that's like, okay, well, this is what that means. Here's the responsible way to deal with that.
Sure.
And I think a lot of people's version of what the responsible thing to do is to yell at it and try to get it to go away. And,
or ignore it and hope it goes away.
Yeah.
Right?
And I don't think that's a solid solution. So.
Not typically.
Yeah, not typically. So, I don't know. It's education. It's knowledge. Knowledge is the way that people... I think everyone should absorb as much information as they possibly can. Even if it is possibly harmful, it's still valuable. It'll shape your opinion of the world more.
Sure.
Even if it's something you don't agree with.
I would say those are the ones that are probably the most important to be exposed to, is the stuff that we don't agree with. So at least we can figure out why we have the opinion that we do.
Yeah.
Right. So we're all landing on the side of no censorship, except.
No censorship except in pretty extreme cases. Just have a curator at the library who says, maybe not this one, but they have to have a really good reason for it. If it teaches anyone to do something bad in a practical way, then sure, maybe get it out of people's hands.
So Anarchist Cookbook, it's okay that's been banned.
That's fine. I understand that one, but
not so much Harry Potter because we can't actually do the spells.
Yeah, but people writing about racism and stuff in the past, I mean, it still goes on, and it's a terrible problem. But the reason why that's there is because we need to learn that stuff did happen in the past.
Exactly.
So we have the context of how to deal with today.
Absolutely. Well said. All right, so that's our show. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The links are in the description below. Thanks for watching.